The air in the grand ballroom wasn't just thick with the scent of expensive perfume and ambition, it was electrified with the potential for ruin. For one woman, this night was meant to be a quiet return to a world that had chewed her up and spat her out. For her ex-husband, it was another stage to flaunt his success. He believed he held all the power, that he could crush her with a single condescending word. What he didn't know, what no one in that glittering hall knew, was that the quiet, mysterious host of the entire evening, the man whose name was whispered in awe, the billionaire Julian Blackwood, was not just her date. He was her husband. And the humiliation Marcus Thorne was about to unleash would not destroy his ex-wife. It would detonate his entire world. Elena adjusted the clasp on her diamond bracelet, the stones cool against her skin. They felt foreign, like beautiful, heavy shackles. It wasn't the diamonds themselves, but the world they represented, a world she had willingly fled and was now, reluctantly, re-entering. Beside her, Julian Blackwood straightened his bespoke tuxedo, his presence a quiet storm of power and grace that filled their penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. "Are you sure about this, Elle?" he asked, his voice a low, comforting rumble. His grey eyes, usually so sharp and analytical when dissecting market trends or corporate takeovers, were soft with concern for her. "I'm sure," Elena lied, or at least told a half-truth. "It's the Blackwood Foundation's biggest night. The host should probably be there with his wife." Julian gently took her hand, turning her to face him. "The host doesn't care about any of that. If his wife isn't happy, we can cancel. I can make an excuse. A sudden illness, a flight to Geneva. No one will question it." That was the thing about Julian. He was arguably one of the most powerful men in New York, a reclusive tech billionaire whose investments shaped the future. Yet he would burn it all down without a second thought for her peace of mind. It was a devotion so profound it sometimes frightened her. "No," she said, managing a real smile this time. "It's time. I can't hide forever." Hiding. That's what she had been doing for the 2 years since her divorce from Marcus Thorne. The divorce hadn't just been a separation, it had been an implosion, a public spectacle orchestrated by Marcus to paint him as the victim and her as an unstable, grasping, social climbing failure. He had used his burgeoning influence in the tech startup scene and his family's old money connections to systematically erase her from the life they had built together. Friends stopped calling, invitations dried up. Her own career in art curation was sabotaged by whispers he had started about her being unreliable and emotionally volatile. She had met Julian 6 months after the ink on the divorce papers had dried. She was working a quiet, humbling job at a small independent art gallery in Soho, rebuilding her life from the ashes. He had walked in one rainy Tuesday afternoon, drenched and without security, to look at a painting by an obscure artist she championed. They talked for hours, not about money or status, but about color theory, the loneliness of creation, and the search for beauty in a broken world. He hadn't known who she was, and she hadn't known the true scale of his influence. They fell in love with the people, not the resumes. Their wedding a year later had been a secret, attended by only a handful of his most trusted staff and her one loyal friend from college. To the world, Julian Blackwood remained an enigma, and Elena was a ghost. Tonight, the ghost was putting on a couture gown and stepping back into the light. The Innovator's Gala was the city's premier event, a fundraiser for tech scholarships hosted by the Blackwood Foundation. It was also the exact sort of event Marcus Thorne would attend to network and polish his own ego. He was now the CEO of a mid-level data analytics firm, Veritas Data, and was celebrated in financial magazines as a visionary. A visionary who had told his wife her art history degree was a cute hobby for a hostess. "He'll be there, you know," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. Julian's thumb stroked the back of her hand. "I know. And when he sees you, he will understand what a colossal fool he was." Elena wished she could believe that. But she knew Marcus. He didn't see people, he saw assets and liabilities. To him, she had been a liability he had successfully liquidated. Seeing her again wouldn't inspire regret. It would ignite his cruelty. He would see her as a trespasser in his world. All right. She took a deep breath, the silk of her emerald gown rustling around her. "Let's go. It's just one night." As they descended in the private elevator, Elena caught her reflection in the mirrored walls. She saw a woman draped in elegance, her auburn hair swept into a graceful chignon, the Blackwood diamonds glittering at her throat. But beneath it all, she could still feel the phantom presence of the woman Marcus had tried to break. Small, insecure, and silenced. Tonight, she had to prove to herself, more than anyone else, that that woman was gone for good. The limousine glided through the city's glittering canyons, but Elena wasn't seeing the lights of Manhattan. She was seeing ghosts. The drive uptown dredged up a specific, venomous memory, one she had tried to bury for years. It was their 5th anniversary. She had spent weeks planning a surprise for Marcus. He had just secured a second round of funding for his first startup, and she was immensely proud of him. She had used her savings, money earned from freelance art consulting, to book a table at a ridiculously exclusive restaurant he'd been wanting to try. She'd bought a new dress, a simple but elegant navy blue sheath that had felt like a wild extravagance at the time. She remembered waiting at the table, the candle flame flickering, her heart thrumming with anticipation. He was an hour late. When he finally arrived, he didn't even apologize. He tossed his briefcase onto the empty chair, loosened his tie, and scowled at the menu. "Did you see the prices here, Elena? This is absurdly irresponsible," he'd snapped, his voice low and sharp. "It's a celebration, Marcus. For your success." "For us," she had replied, her smile faltering. He had laughed, a short, barking sound devoid of humor. "A celebration? You celebrate when the job is done. This is just one step. Do you have any idea the pressure I'm under, the payrolls I have to meet? And you're here spending it on overpriced fish." "I paid for this myself, with my own money," she had said, her voice small. That was when the true cruelty had surfaced. He looked at her, his eyes cold and dismissive, and gestured at her dress. "With what? That art money you make? Your little hobby?" "Elena, don't be naive. My salary pays for the apartment you live in, the food you eat, the clothes on your back. Your money is an allowance I permit you to have. Let's not pretend you're some independent career woman. You're a hostess. Your job is to make my life easier, not more expensive." Each word had been a perfectly aimed dart. He had systematically dismantled her pride, her effort, and her very sense of self-worth in under a minute. She had sat there, surrounded by the hushed elegance of the restaurant, feeling like a child who had been publicly scolded. The rest of the dinner was a silent, agonizing affair. He had ordered the cheapest thing on the menu to make his point, and when they got home, he had gone straight to his office to work, leaving her alone with the ashes of her romantic gesture. That was the Marcus she remembered. Not a monster, which would have been simpler, but a master of 1,000 small cruelties. He never raised his voice in public, never left a visible bruise. His weapons were words, condescension, and a suffocating control that he disguised as practicality. He had convinced her that her dreams were childish, her opinions uninformed, and her value tied directly to his success. A warm hand, covering hers, snapped her back to the present. Julian was watching her, his expression unreadable but intensely focused. "You're a million miles away," he said. "Just remembering," she admitted, the word tasting like ash. "Remember this, then," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "The man who said those things to you was a small man, terrified that you would outgrow him. He kept you in a small box because he was afraid of how brightly you would shine outside of it." It was as if he had read her mind, plucking the very memory from her head and exposing it to the light. This was his gift, an almost unnerving empathy, a way of seeing the hidden wounds in people. "How did you know?" she whispered. "Because I've met men like him my whole life," Julian answered, his gaze turning to the city lights flashing past. "They build their empires on loud voices and weak foundations. They fear anyone who is quietly, authentically strong. That's you, Elena. You're the strongest person I've ever met." The limousine slowed, pulling up to the curb in front of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, its grand facade illuminated against the night sky. Liveried valets rushed forward. The press flashbulbs began to pop like a swarm of angry fireflies. Elena took a deep breath, the air feeling suddenly sharp and cold. The memory of Marcus's cruelty was a bitter taste in her mouth. But Julian's words were a balm, a shield. She was not the same woman who had cried silently in a taxi home on her anniversary. She was Elena Blackwood, and she was done being afraid. She squeezed Julian's hand. "Okay," she said, her voice steady now. "I'm ready." Stepping out of the car was like diving into an ocean of light and sound. The frenetic energy of the red carpet was a physical force, a wall of camera flashes, shouted questions, and the low roar of the assembled crowd. Elena instinctively stiffened, but Julian's hand was a steady, warm presence on the small of her back, guiding her with an effortless calm that seemed to bend the chaos around him. They bypassed the main press line, a privilege of being the host. A few photographers managed to get shots, their lenses flashing, but Julian guided her swiftly towards the museum's grand entrance. "Ignore them," he murmured, his voice for her ears only. "They're just part of the scenery." The great hall was even more overwhelming. It had been transformed into a celestial wonderland. Music from a string quartet drifted down from a balcony, mingling with the sophisticated chatter of 1,000 guests. The air hummed with power. Senators clinked glasses with tech moguls, celebrated artists chatted with venture capitalists, and socialites moved through the crowd like brightly colored fish. Everyone who was anyone was here. And somewhere in this glittering sea of ambition, her shark was waiting. For the first hour, it was a blur of introductions. Julian, who so rarely made public appearances, was a gravitational force. People were drawn to him, their faces a mixture of awe, respect, and naked opportunism. And they were all, without exception, intensely curious about the stunning woman on his arm. "Julian, wonderful to see you, and this must be—" A portly senator boomed. "My wife, Elena Blackwood," Julian would say, each time the word sending a small, private thrill through her. He never said, "This is my wife," but always, "My wife, Elena." It was a subtle but important distinction. He wasn't presenting her as an accessory. He was stating a fact, presenting her as an equal. The reactions were always the same, a flicker of surprise, followed by a reassessment as they looked at her with new eyes. They had expected a young model or a society heiress. They saw instead a woman with a quiet confidence and an intelligent gaze that met theirs directly. She was an enigma, And in this world, an enigma was more fascinating than any scandal. She was starting to feel a fragile sense of ease, a belief that perhaps she could navigate this night unscathed when she saw him. Marcus Thorne was holding court near the Temple of Dender exhibit. He stood with a small group of admirers, a glass of champagne in one hand, gesturing animatedly with the other. He looked exactly the same, yet different. His suit was more expensive, his watch more ostentatious. He had cultivated an air of success that clung to him like expensive cologne. With him was a woman, impossibly young and blonde, clinging to his arm with a practiced, adoring gaze. Elena recognized her as Tiffany Hayes, an Instagram influencer whose father owned a major media conglomerate. A perfect strategic alliance for a man like Marcus. Elena's heart gave a painful thud, a Pavlovian response to the sight of her tormentor. She felt a primal urge to turn, to walk away, to find a quiet corner and disappear. Julian must have felt her tense, because his hand tightened ever so slightly on her back. "Breathe," he whispered. "You own this room just as much as I do." It was then that Marcus looked up, his gaze sweeping the room with the casual arrogance of a man who believed he belonged. His eyes passed over her, then flickered back, a flicker of confusion in them. He saw a beautiful woman in an expensive gown standing with a group of people. He didn't recognize her at first. To him, Elena existed in a different context, in a plain dress, in their old apartment, in the background of his life. Then, a slow, dawning recognition spread across his face, followed immediately by a sneer. He excused himself from his group and began to walk towards her, Tiffany trailing in his wake like a decorative kite tail. This was it, the confrontation she had been dreading. "Well, well," Marcus said, his voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes raking over her dress with mock appreciation. "Elena, I have to say, I'm surprised to see you here. I didn't think they catered to the gallery assistant crowd." His words were designed to do one thing, put her back in her box, to remind her, and anyone listening, that she was nobody. Before Elena could respond, a well-known tech journalist, David Chen, who had been speaking with them, turned to Marcus. "Marcus, good to see you. I don't believe you've had the pleasure of meeting our host, Julian Blackwood." Marcus's focus shifted to Julian. He clearly didn't recognize the famously private billionaire by sight, but the name Blackwood and the title host registered. A flicker of professional avarice crossed his face. This was a networking opportunity. He completely ignored Elena, extending a hand to Julian. "Mr. Blackwood, an honor. Marcus Thorne, CEO of Veritas Data. You've created a magnificent event." Julian looked from Marcus's outstretched hand to his face, his expression one of glacial calm. He made no move to shake it. "Thorne," Julian said, his voice flat and cold. "I know who you are." The dismissal was so subtle, so absolute, that a few people nearby fell silent. Marcus's smile faltered, his hand hovering awkwardly in the air for a moment, before he dropped it. He was confused. He had expected the fawning respect he was used to. He turned his attention back to Elena, his embarrassment quickly morphing into renewed spite. He decided to reassert his dominance the only way he knew how, by belittling her. "So, tell me, Elena," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Who did you come with? Did your little gallery finally sell a painting for more than $1,000? Or did you find some lonely old patron to bring you along as his date?" The insult hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. This was worse than she had imagined. He wasn't just being cruel. He was trying to publicly shame her, to paint her as a desperate woman who had to sell herself for a ticket. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The old fear, the old shame, was choking her. The small circle of conversation around them had fallen into a tense, uncomfortable silence. David Chen, the journalist, looked awkwardly from Marcus to Elena, clearly sensing the venomous history. Julian remained perfectly still, his grey eyes fixed on Marcus with an unnerving intensity, like a predator watching its prey wander into a trap. He was letting this play out. He was giving Elena the space to fight her own battle. Summoning every ounce of strength she possessed, Elena found her voice. It was quieter than she wanted, but it was steady. "Hello, Marcus." "Tiffany?" she said, nodding politely to the younger woman, who simply looked confused. "It's an impressive turnout." Her composure seemed to infuriate Marcus even more. He wanted a reaction. He wanted tears, anger, a scene that would prove his narrative about her being emotionally volatile. Her quiet dignity was a rejection of the power he thought he still held over her. "Impressive turnout, yes," he scoffed, taking a deliberate step closer. "But one has to wonder how some of the guests pass the vetting process. This is supposed to be a gathering of innovators, of people shaping the future, not for social climbers clinging to the past." The insult was so direct, so personal, that a woman nearby gasped softly. Marcus smiled, energized by the drama. He was performing, cementing his status by publicly demeaning his ex-wife. He saw it as a demonstration of power. "I seem to recall a time when you couldn't even manage our household budget without my help," he continued, his voice laced with false pity. "And now you're rubbing shoulders with titans of industry. It's quite the transformation. You must tell me your secret." Elena's hands clenched into fists at her sides, her nails digging into her palms. He was twisting reality. She had managed their finances meticulously, stretching his modest early career salary to build a life while he poured every spare dollar into his fledgling company. He was rewriting history to suit his narrative of her as a helpless, incompetent woman. "My secret, Marcus, is that I left you," she said, her voice gaining a sharp, clear edge. That seems to have been a very effective catalyst for positive change. The direct hit landed. A flicker of genuine anger flashed in Marcus's eyes. He had lost control of the situation. She wasn't crumbling. She was fighting back. He needed to escalate, to do something physical and undeniable to reassert his dominance and humiliate her completely. He looked down at the full glass of red wine in his hand. Then he looked at her dress, a magnificent creation of emerald green silk that had probably cost more than her entire wardrobe from their marriage. It was a symbol of her new life, a life that didn't include him. And he was going to ruin it. "Oh, clumsy me," he said with theatrical carelessness. As he turned towards her, he stumbled, his arm lurching forward. The dark red wine arced through the air. Time seemed to slow down. Elena saw it coming, but was too stunned to move. The liquid splashed across the front of her gown, a shocking, ugly stain that spread rapidly across the delicate fabric. It was like a wound, a violent splash of crimson against the serene green. A collective gasp went through the onlookers. The music seemed to fade away. All eyes were on them. "Oh my goodness! Elena, I am so sorry," Marcus exclaimed, his voice dripping with insincerity. He grabbed a napkin from a passing waiter's tray. "Here, let me help you with that. You must be devastated. A dress like that. Well, it must have been a rental, surely." He dabbed at the stain, his touch lingering, his actions a performance of feigned concern that was really an act of public violation. He was marking his territory, even now. He was showing everyone that he could still touch her, still ruin her, still make her the center of a humiliating spectacle. Elena stood frozen, the wet, sticky fabric clinging to her skin. The wine was cold, but a hot flush of shame and rage washed over her. He had done it. He had backed her into a corner and, in front of everyone, thrown his filth on her. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, some pitiful, some scornful, some morbidly curious. The whispers started, ripples of gossip spreading through the grand hall. This was the moment, the breaking point. The old Elena would have fled in tears, proving him right. But the old Elena wasn't here tonight. She looked past Marcus's smug, concerned face and met Julian's eyes. His expression was no longer calm. It was a thunder cloud, a promise of utter devastation. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod, a silent message passing between them. Now. Elena took a slow, deliberate step back, away from Marcus's patronizing dabs with the napkin. She looked down at the grotesque stain on her dress, then back up at his face, her expression unreadable. "It's quite all right, Marcus," she said, her voice surprisingly clear and resonant in the sudden quiet. "Accidents happen, though it does seem you've always had a talent for making a mess of things you can't appreciate." The subtle barb hit its mark. Marcus's fake smile tightened. Before he could formulate another condescending reply, Julian moved. He didn't storm forward. He didn't raise his voice. His movement was fluid and precise, a study in controlled power. He stepped to Elena's side, placing a proprietary hand on her back, his thumb stroking the silk just above the devastating stain. He then shed his tuxedo jacket and, with an air of profound tenderness, draped it over her shoulders, completely concealing the damage. It was an act of shielding, of protection, so intimate and commanding that it silenced the remaining whispers. He then turned his gaze, cold and sharp as splintered ice, on Marcus. "Thorne," Julian said, his voice low, but carrying an unmistakable weight of authority that cut through the hall's ambient noise. "You will leave." It wasn't a request. It was a royal decree. Marcus, however, was still blinded by his own arrogance. He saw a man, admittedly a well-dressed one, defending his date. He mistook Julian's quiet authority for a lack of real power. "I don't think so," Marcus sneered, trying to regain his footing. "I am an invited guest. You can't just. This is my event, in my hall, funded by my foundation," Julian interrupted, each phrase landing like a hammer blow. "I can and I will have you removed, permanently." The words hung in the air. My event, my hall, my foundation. The realization dawned on Marcus's face in slow, agonizing stages. The initial confusion, the flicker of denial, the dawning horror. He looked around wildly at the BF monogram on the napkins, the banners for the Blackwood Foundation, and then back at the calm, formidable man in front of him, the man who was with his ex-wife. David Chen, the journalist, chose that moment to step forward, perhaps to de-escalate, but inadvertently lighting the final fuse. "Marcus," he said gently, "I tried to tell you. This is Julian Blackwood." The name, spoken plainly, echoed in the cavernous space. Julian Blackwood, the reclusive genius, the kingmaker, the man whose net worth was discussed in the same tones as the GDP of a small country, the host of the evening, the man Marcus had been desperate to meet, to impress, to solicit for funding. Marcus's face went from pale to ashen. The blood drained from it so fast he looked like he might faint. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. His entire world, his carefully constructed universe of ambition and status, was tilting on its axis. The crowd, catching on, began to murmur. Phones were subtly being raised, cameras recording the unfolding social execution. But the final, devastating blow had yet to fall. Julian drew Elena a fraction of an inch closer, his arm a band of steel around her. He surveyed the watching crowd, his gaze sweeping over senators, CEOs, and socialites. Then he spoke, his voice carrying with effortless command to every corner of the room. "For those of you who I haven't yet had the pleasure of meeting this evening," he announced, "and for the benefit of Mr. Thorne, who seems to be confused, allow me to introduce the co-host of this gala, the woman whose vision for this foundation has been the driving force behind its success for the past year. My partner in all things." He paused, letting the anticipation build to an unbearable peak. He then looked down at Elena, his expression softening with a love and pride so fierce it was almost a physical force. "My wife," he declared, his voice ringing with finality. "Elena Blackwood." If the first revelation had been a gunshot, this was a cannon blast. The silence that followed was absolute, a collective, stunned intake of breath from 1,000 people. "Wife, Elena Blackwood." Marcus Thorne stared, his eyes wide with utter disbelief. His mind frantically tried to process the impossible information. The gallery assistant, the incompetent woman he had discarded, the social climber he had just tried to humiliate. She wasn't some pathetic +1. She was the queen of the castle. His castle. The sneer was gone, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He had not just insulted a guest. He had not just assaulted the host's date. He had, with spectacular public flair, attempted to humiliate the wife of Julian Blackwood, a man known for his quiet disposition, but also for his ruthless and unforgiving memory. In that single moment, Marcus Thorne understood that he had not just ruined Elena's dress, he had immolated his own future. The silence in the great hall finally broke, shattering into a tidal wave of whispers. "His wife? Blackwood is married. Did you see what Thorne just did?" The sound was a low, sibilant hiss that seemed to suck all the air from Marcus's lungs. The sea of faces that had been watching him with amusement or pity now stared with a kind of morbid fascination, as if watching a man walk his own plank. Marcus opened his mouth, a desperate, croaking sound emerging. "Mr. Blackwood, Julian, I had no idea. Elena, I'm so sorry. It was an accident, a terrible, clumsy accident." His words were a pathetic scramble, the desperate backtracking of a man who saw the guillotine blade glinting above his neck. Julian didn't even look at him. His focus was entirely on Elena. "Are you all right?" he murmured, his voice soft again, the storm having passed. Elena looked at Marcus, at the abject fear in his eyes, the terror of a bully who had finally punched someone who could punch back 1,000 times harder. And she felt nothing. The fear he had held over her for years was gone, replaced by a profound, cleansing emptiness. He was just a man, a small, cruel man who was now utterly irrelevant. "I'm fine," she said to Julian, and for the first time that night, it was the absolute truth. She squeezed his hand, a silent thank you that conveyed everything. Julian nodded once, then addressed his head of security, a large, impassive man named Arthur, who had appeared as if from thin air at his side. "Arthur," Julian said, his voice calm and businesslike, "please escort Mr. Thorne out, and make a note. He and any entity associated with him are no longer welcome at any Blackwood Foundation event. Ever." "Of course, sir," Arthur said. He and another guard moved towards Marcus. "No, please," Marcus begged, his voice cracking. He looked desperately at Elena. "Elena, please, tell him. We were married. We have history. It was a misunderstanding." He was trying to use their past as a shield. the very past he had just used as a weapon against her. The irony was pathetic. Elena met his gaze, her expression serene. "Goodbye, Marcus," she said, and then she turned her back on him, a simple, final act of dismissal. As Arthur and the other guard firmly took Marcus by the arms, he started to babble, his composure completely shattering. Tiffany, his influencer girlfriend, had already vanished, melting back into the crowd like a phantom, severing her association with the social leper. Marcus was led away, his protests fading as he was guided through a side exit, not the grand entrance he had so proudly entered. The show was over. As soon as he was gone, the atmosphere in the room shifted. A wave of people began to move towards them, but not with pity. They came with respect, with awe, and with a burning curiosity. A powerful congresswoman, who had given Elena a cursory nod earlier, now approached with a warm, effusive smile. "Mrs. Blackwood, Elena, what a pleasure to finally meet you properly. Your work with the Scholarship Fund's Selection Committee has been truly transformative." The head of a major biotech firm, a man known for his brusque demeanor, came to shake her hand. "My apologies for that disgraceful scene, Mrs. Blackwood. Julian, your wife has the patience of a saint and the grace of a queen. One by one, the titans of industry, the political power players, the very people Marcus had been so desperate to impress, came not to console her, but to congratulate and court her. They didn't see a victim. They saw a woman of immense poise and power, the wife and partner of Julian Blackwood, a force to be reckoned with in her own right." Julian kept his arm around her, a silent, supportive presence. He let her take the lead, watching with pride as she navigated the conversations with an elegance and intelligence that charmed everyone she spoke to. She wasn't hiding behind his name. She was inhabiting her own. She discussed art with collectors, tech philanthropy with CEOs, and educational policy with the congresswoman, her knowledge and passion evident in every word. Later in the evening, Julian led her away from the throng to a quiet, private balcony overlooking the city skyline. The noise of the gala faded to a distant murmur. He took off his jacket, which she was still wearing, and draped it more securely around her. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice quiet. "I should have stepped in sooner." Elena turned to him, reaching up to touch his face. "No," she said firmly. "You did it perfectly. You let me face him. And then you showed him that my new life is protected by a dragon. A very handsome, well-dressed dragon." A rare, genuine smile broke across Julian's face, lighting up his features. "I do have my moments." She looked out at the endless sea of lights that was New York City. For years, this city had felt like Marcus's territory, a place where she was an outsider. But tonight, standing here with Julian, she felt like she was looking at it from the ramparts of her own castle. The stain on her dress was no longer a mark of shame. It was a battle scar, a testament to the moment she stopped being Marcus Thorne's ex-wife and truly became Elena Blackwood. The night was far from over, but for her, the war already felt won. The fallout was not immediate, but it was total. It began the very next morning. The Innovator's Gala was the premier networking event of the year, and what happened there didn't stay there. It rippled through the financial and tech worlds with the speed of a stock market crash. The first tremor hit Marcus's phone at 7 a.m. It was a call from Robert Vance, the lead investor from the venture capital firm that held a majority stake in Veritas Data. Vance was a ruthless, old-school financier who valued two things above all else: profit and reputation. "Thorne," Vance's voice was gravelly, devoid of any pleasantries. "My phone has been ringing off the hook since sunrise. Tell me what the hell happened at the Blackwood Gala last night." Marcus, who had spent a sleepless night replaying his own social suicide, tried to spin it. "Bob, it was a misunderstanding, a personal matter with my ex-wife that got blown out of proportion." "Personal matter?" Vance barked. "I have 2 board members and a senator who told me you assaulted Julian Blackwood's wife. Do you have any idea who you just picked a fight with? Blackwood doesn't just own companies, he owns entire sectors. When he sneezes, the NASDAQ catches a cold. And you idiot, you threw wine on his wife." "It was an accident," Marcus pleaded, his voice thin with panic. "Nobody believes that," Vance said flatly. "The story I'm hearing is that you publicly humiliated a woman who showed you nothing but class, only to find out she holds more power in her little finger than you've accumulated in your entire life. It makes you look weak, petty, and stupid. Those are not qualities we look for in a CEO. The board is calling an emergency meeting for this afternoon. Get your affairs in order." The line went dead. Marcus felt a cold dread pool in his stomach. By noon, the gossip columns and tech blogs had the story. They didn't have photos of the incident, as Blackwood's security had been quick to shut down any obvious photography, but the eyewitness accounts were vivid and damning. Tech CEO Marcus Thorne's Gala gaffer read one headline. "The Billionaire's Wife, the Shocking Reveal That Rocked the Met," read another. The narrative was clear. Marcus Thorne was a fool and a bully. His own employees at Veritas Data saw the stories. The internal chat channels, usually filled with code snippets and project updates, were now buzzing with links to the articles. The respect his employees had for him, already thin due to his arrogant management style, evaporated completely. He was a laughingstock. Meanwhile, Elena was having a very different morning. She woke up to the smell of fresh coffee and a single perfect gardenia on her bedside table. Julian was already up, but he had left a note. "They're just stories. The truth is what we have here. Take all the time you need today." Her phone was buzzing, but not with hate. It was her one loyal friend, Sarah, ecstatic. "I'm reading about you in Vanity Fair online. You are a legend. Call me." There were also emails. One was from the curator of the Guggenheim, a man who had never returned her calls when she was married to Marcus, now inviting her to a private viewing. Another was from the head of the Sotheby's Institute of Art, asking if she would consider giving a guest lecture. The world that had been closed to her was now flinging its doors wide open. She wasn't naive. She knew this was because of Julian's name, but it was also because she had proven herself. She hadn't crumbled. She had stood her ground with grace. The name Blackwood opened the door, but her own strength and intelligence were what people were now clamoring to see. That afternoon, Julian came home early. He found her in her home office, a beautiful, sunlit room he had designed for her, sketching out ideas for a new philanthropic initiative, a program to fund and mentor undiscovered female artists. She looked up and smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. "How was your day?" she asked. "Productive," he said, loosening his tie. "I made a few calls, sold off my fund's small indirect stake in Robert Vance's portfolio. I believe he understood the message." Elena paused. She knew how Julian operated. He never made loud threats. He moved silently, surgically, shifting vast sums of capital in ways that sent unmistakable signals. By divesting from Vance's fund, he was signaling his displeasure. Vance, in turn, would do whatever it took to get back in Blackwood's good graces. And the most obvious way to do that was to cut out the cancer that had caused the problem. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "Yes, I did," he countered, coming to stand behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders. "He insulted you. It's not about revenge, Elena. It's about order. There are consequences for such actions. He built a house of cards on a foundation of arrogance. All I did was blow on it. The final card fell 2 days later. Marcus Thorne was forced to resign as CEO of Veritas Data, citing personal reasons. The press release was sterile and corporate, but everyone knew the real story. His golden parachute was a fraction of what it should have been. His name was mud in the investment community. No one would touch him. The empire he had sacrificed his marriage for, the success he had lorded over her, had crumbled to dust in less than 48 hours, all because he couldn't resist one last act of petty cruelty. 6 months felt like a lifetime. The seasons had turned, washing the city in the cool greys of winter before bursting forth with the defiant, vibrant greens of spring. For Elena, it was a season of profound creation, of turning a painful past into a beautiful future, brushstroke by brushstroke. The Soho Art Gallery, the very place she had sought refuge and anonymity after her divorce, was now reborn. It was the flagship location of the Blackwood Cane Initiative, a name that deliberately intertwined her new life with the identity she had fought to reclaim. This wasn't Julian's pet project he'd gifted his wife. It was her vision, her passion, brought to life with the resources he had enthusiastically provided. Tonight was the culmination of her work. Her inaugural exhibition, titled Resilience, was a resounding success. It showcased the raw, breathtaking talent of 10 female artists whom the established art world had overlooked. The gallery was packed, not with the cold, calculating socialites of the Gala, but with a vibrant mix of genuine art lovers, passionate young creatives, and influential critics. The air didn't hum with ambition, it sang with excitement and inspiration. Laughter echoed off the high ceilings, and the clinking of glasses was a toast to new beginnings. Elena moved through the room with a calm, magnetic grace. She wore a simple, elegant, cream-colored dress, her only jewelry a delicate gold locket Julian had given her for their first anniversary. It held a tiny, pressed edelweiss from the hills where he'd first told her he loved her. She was no longer a guest in someone else's world. She was the creator of this one. She was deep in conversation with Chloe, a young painter whose powerful, abstract canvases were the centerpiece of the exhibit. A year ago, Chloe had been waitressing to make ends meet, her masterpieces stacked in a tiny, damp apartment. "I still can't believe it, Elena," Chloe was saying, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "That red dot on every single one of my pieces. A collector from Dubai bought the whole series. You didn't just give me a wall to hang my art on. You gave me a future." "You earned it, Chloe," Elena said, squeezing her hand. "Your talent was always there. It just needed a spotlight." It was in that moment of shared triumph that she saw a familiar face by the entrance. David Chen, the journalist from that fateful night at the Met, navigated the crowd with a respectful smile, making his way towards her. "Elena," he said, his voice warm with genuine admiration. "This is a triumph. What you've done here is the talk of the town, and for all the right reasons. Congratulations." "David, thank you so much for coming," she replied. "It means a lot. I have to admit, I'm also here on a professional matter, if you'll indulge me," he said, his tone shifting slightly. "I'm writing a piece for the Times magazine. A Where Are They Now? Look at the tech bubble's recent casualties. That story led me, inevitably, to Marcus Thorne." Elena felt a flicker of something. Not pain, not anger, but a distant, clinical curiosity. The name was like a word from a foreign language she no longer spoke. "Oh, it's not a pretty picture," David continued, lowering his voice. "He fled to California after the board ousted him. Lost the penthouse, the car, the whole lifestyle. He tried to get a new startup off the ground, but his name is poison. No venture capital firm will touch him. The word on the street is that a man who shows such catastrophic personal judgment can't be trusted with millions in investment. It's the ultimate irony. His character, the very thing he thought was irrelevant next to his ambition, was his undoing. Elena listened, her expression serene. She pictured Marcus, a man who worshipped at the altar of success, now excommunicated from his own church. He's consulting now, David added, for a small, no-name software company in Cupertino. I'm told it's essentially an entry-level strategy job. He sent me an email, actually. A long, rambling manifesto blaming everyone but himself. He blames the woke mob, cancel culture, the coastal elites. He paints himself as the victim of a vindictive billionaire. He paused, looking at her carefully. He also mentioned you. Said it was all a terrible misunderstanding. That if he could just talk to you, he could explain. That he still loves you. The final sentence hung in the air, absurd and pathetic. Love. The word from Marcus's mouth had always been a transaction, a tool of control. He didn't love her. He missed what she represented, an easy target for his cruelty, a silent witness to his perceived greatness. He was reaching for a ghost, trying to rewrite a story whose final chapter had been written long ago. Elena looked around the vibrant, joyful room she had built. She looked at Chloe, now laughing with a museum curator. She looked at the art, the expressions of souls who had refused to be silenced. This was real. This was her life. Marcus and his sad, hollow words belonged to a black-and-white photograph from a forgotten album. She met David's gaze, her own clear and steady. "There's nothing to explain," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Our story has been told, and it's over. But these stories," she gestured to the incredible art surrounding them, "are just beginning. Tell your readers about Chloe. Tell them about her resilience. That's a story worth printing." Later that evening, long after the last guest had departed, and a soft silence had fallen over the gallery, Julian arrived. He found her standing alone in the center of the room, gazing at her favorite piece, a magnificent sculpture of a phoenix crafted from scorched and shattered pieces of metal, its wings spread wide as if taking its first flight from the ashes. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder, his warmth a familiar comfort. "David Chen was here," she said, quietly, leaning back into his embrace. "I know. My office flagged his press credentials. I trust he was professional." "He was," she confirmed. "He told me about Marcus. He's diminished." She paused, then added, "He says he wants to explain things, that he still loves me." Julian was silent for a moment, his arms holding her just a little tighter. "And what is there to explain?" he finally asked, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "That small men will always try to tear down what they can't build? That fear often wears the mask of cruelty? Some things don't need an explanation." "No," she agreed, a profound sense of peace settling over her. "They don't." She turned in his arms to face him, her hands coming up to cup his face. "Thank you, Julian. Not for the money, or the gallery, or the revenge. Thank you for seeing the person who was always there, buried under all the rubble." "Elena," he said, his grey eyes soft with a love that still took her breath away. "All I did was offer you a hand. You're the one who climbed out. You built this. This is your masterpiece." He gestured to the room around them, but she knew he wasn't just talking about the gallery. He was talking about her life. The streetlights of Soho cast a warm, golden glow through the gallery's large windows. Elena saw their reflection in the glass. The strong, confident woman, smiling back, wrapped in the arms of the man who was her partner, not her savior. The ghost of Marcus Thorne was finally gone, not destroyed by vengeance, but simply rendered irrelevant by her happiness. The past was a finished painting, hanging in a museum she no longer needed to visit. The future was a fresh, blank canvas, vast and brilliant with possibility, and she, Elena Blackwood Kane, was ready to pick up the brush. What a journey of vindication and empowerment. Elena's story is a powerful reminder that our worth is never defined by those who try to diminish us. It's about finding the strength to walk away from a toxic past and having the courage to build a new future on our own terms. Marcus believed his power came from wealth and status, but he learned that true power lies in integrity, grace, and the quiet strength to treat others with respect. Elena didn't need a billionaire to save her. She needed a partner who saw the queen she already was. Her ultimate triumph wasn't just watching her ex-husband's downfall, but in building her own empire of passion and purpose. If this story of resilience and ultimate victory moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder of their own strength. And of course, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next dramatic story. What did you think of Marcus's ultimate fate? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.